All right, so this is the final round of the LG G4 to the right, the Samsung S95D to the left. And this is going to basically showcase the difference between when you have a real calibration done on both TVs and what they're capable of doing. In this example, LG pulls ahead in the color blue. I do like the representation that they have a lot better than what we have on the S95D. Again, it's not that the LG can't compete with anything, but overall it does get beaten. So the winner of this comparison is the Samsung S95D. We'll go ahead and get that out of the way nice and early. However, the LG can be very, very competitive if you have my settings. And I have to say it that way, not hiring a calibrator. My particular settings, because I created an in-house calibration standard that literally no one else goes by. With that as the case, if you use anyone else's settings, it's going to look exactly like it did in the last video. So when all the LG fans in the comments start doing victory laps about how close this looks, understand I am the only one with this result, because every single person is calibrating to a 30-year-old standard, okay? And that 30-year-old standard has problems. And we've talked about it, and I think I've proven my point with that part. Now on to when it's fully calibrated, what the differences are. Let's get this out of the way. The Samsung S95D is the brighter TV. You're seeing it here, it is brighter. The Samsung S95D gets over 2,100 plus nits. I've measured it, I've shown this. It's a bright damn TV. That's one of the biggest reasons to own it, and it's why I personally own it. It's what makes gaming so rewarding, and so on and so forth. The brightness is insane on the S95D. Not that the brightness on the LG G4 is bad, it's just what Samsung is doing is a bit better. Now, we're going to talk about some differences that we see. Vibrancy and highlight detail are huge, so there's obviously more color on the Samsung S95D. However, the LG G4 now does have a bit more in the way in that dimensionality, where you see isolation of subjects, again, the roof, everything. You're seeing more three-dimensional contrast come out. However, the Samsung is still pulling ahead, and every little detail within that structure, again, the lines on the shed, the lines on the fence, having richer contrast, sharper lines, leading to more immersive contrast, more three-dimensionality, and ultimately more depth. Again, this is what it does. It looks really good as a result. Now, I do like the way LG represents some shades of color, but not all. As I look at this image, I do prefer the S95D more. There's just more depth coming off. And again, similar to your boy Vincent over at HDTV Test, at one point I was a student of ISF, which is why I love contrasty images so much, because contrast makes images. And anyone trying to sidestep that is they're playing the wrong game here, because the reality is contrast tells the story, and the S95D has contrast in spades. The LG G4, unfortunately, even after my settings are put in, just can't get to this level. That's due to not having the brightness levels and the color volume, really, and those two things really do hinder it. Again, the brightness, I can't get it through enough on YouTube to show the immense amount of three-dimensional, like, it just pulls you in with how sharp and how isolated each and every line is. Every line is sharp, very distinct. The shadows on the wall, everything is its own isolated thing, where on the G4, it's a bit more flat by comparison. After a while, this does start to suck, and it starts to become annoying. Because, I mean, look at the dog, man. The highlights immediately captured me on the S95D with how bright and beautiful the dog is. However, I do like the look of the ground better on the LG G4. Now, there are those that will say the LG G4 is a bit more oversaturated, because anytime there's more color, that TV is just called oversaturated. So this is the more natural look that people will like, I suppose. But I do like what LG did for the ground, because I feel like that's more natural. Personal opinion, I guess I'll leave it at that for that particular section. But what I can say is, again, even when you start looking at like shadows and every instance that I can look at, the highlight placement on SID right now is just to die for. You can see it more, and the G4 just doesn't have that to the degree that it needs to. And I say that because, yes, sure, you can go ahead and you can forget about calibration and you can just make it bright for the sake of making it bright, but we saw what vivid mode looked like. If you want to get as close to a QD OLED and the Samsung S95D contrast as possible, here's the other part of this. You have to sacrifice brightness. And nobody is willing to do that these days. Everybody wants the most amount of brightness. The Samsung can just do it because it's a freaking crazy bright TV. That's the other issue that a lot of people are going to run into. So it's going to get to the point where you're like, do I really want the LG G4 if I can't use all of the brightness? Because again, WOLED and maintaining that level of contrast that everybody expects from a WOLED is just not possible. It's literally not possible with the way that it is. I mean, maybe a firmware update. I don't know. I mean, I guess people will argue that next in the comments, but who really can say what people will argue? All I can tell you is what I'm seeing at the time of doing this review. And at the time of doing this review, I mean, the S95D is spades clearer. And I really, guys, hear me when I say this. Like, genuinely as a person, hear the sincerity in my voice. I really didn't expect that to happen. I had no idea that the Samsung S95D had this much contrast over the LG G4. I just knew that because it was a glossy screen, that would have been better for contrast, and it immediately would have went over to the LG G4, especially with the new processor and the adjustments to clarity. That would have just gone straight to the LG G4. It didn't. Instead, what we have is more depth and dimensionality on the S95D. And I can't stress how off the reds are on LG. I don't know if that's going to show on YouTube, but that is not red. It is blood orange, and it looks freaking terrible. It does. I mean, even Buzz Lightyear's buttons. But again, I won't harp too much on that particular segment. We're going to keep it going. We're going to go to this scene and up since I've shown this quite a lot. Okay, we're going to pause right here. Now, I like the look, okay? This is going to make a lot of people like go, what the hell? I like the look of both equally in this example. This is where I say they get really close to tying. When you have something that's not insanely bright or insanely colorful, they do look very, very similar, but there are nuanced details. So in this particular example, the LG is able to get a little bit more of that cinematic contrast, which just means it has a little bit more of a flatter look. It doesn't have as much highlight detail or peak white levels as the Samsung does. And as a result, it does look a little bit more cinematic. They do look very similar. But again, as the comparison will start to play out, then you'll start noticing clear differences between the two. For example, now there's just a difference in the way that this is brighter at the top here. It doesn't look like it, but it's bright. It's like it's a different type of brighter. It's isolated way better on the LG G4 than on the S95D with the color white. It just is. However, almost everything else in this example about the S95D looks better, and we're just going to let it play from there. Now again, the warm tones in the back, the colors, they look better on the S95D overall. And ultimately, this is why I say it edges out the LG G4. Now, in a scene like this, to be very transparent and very fair and very honest, as I look at them side by side right now, again, with my settings, they look so identical, it's so hard to tell the difference between the two right now in this example. I can tell that the S95D is a little bit brighter. The G4 is preserving shadow detail a little bit better. And when I say shadow detail, I just mean like, you know, it's not clipping, I would say. So highlight detail is what I'll kind of say. It kind of rolls it off a little bit more, right? And you can see that in the building here. We're over here, it's just a bit brighter. So those little nuanced details, but again, the overall feel is inaccurate because if you've ever been outside when the sun is blasting, you're gonna see a really high peak brightness level, and that just doesn't exist on the LG G4 the way that it should. And again, as we look at these two examples, you can see more differences, like where contrast is clear on the advantage of the S95D side. When we look at Shady Oaks retirement right here on the van, that's super dark, where over here it's not as pronounced, it's more faded. And again, that's what I mean when I say that. Again, cinematic contrast. Anytime you hear cinematic or natural, it's just a way of saying flat, not as contrast rich, because that's the whole thing that like a lot of people like to call cinematic. Now, as we look at these balloons coming out, the Samsung, again, still has the more vibrant color, but LG does have more nuanced color. And if we run this back, if you remember that example that I did with the balloons on the wall and how bad that looked, we're going to run it back now to that same example, try to get some balloons on the wall. This example, again, I'm going to give this a total win for the Samsung. It probably might not look like that on YouTube, but I mean, the contrast, these balloons, you could almost feel the texture of each one. You can see the vibrant color. And if you really squint, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. Like, you have to look at primary colors when you're trying to pick out colors, right? Especially because this is a recording of a television. It is not like the television itself in front of you. So the more vibrant green versus the more pale and faded looking green, the same thing can be said about the blue and the reds and all the other primary colors. So that's something that you're going to see as well. Again, the sky, primary color, so again, richer, more pure, things of that nature. Again, it's just got more contrast, and there's no real way to kind of sidestep that as what it is. And there will be people that will try, but again, we're not here for that. What we are here to discuss is how they do look similar in a lot of scenes, but again, look at the brightness now of the water. An actual white level, that it's pure white, versus that where you're getting a little bit more of that color dilution and it's not able to keep up quite as well. Now again, the contrast, this is where brightness, why people are so crazy in 2024 about brightness. This is why brightness is a big deal, okay? If we look at the porch just has more brightness, which leads to more contrast, more sharp lines, leading lines of structures than what we have on the LG, where it's more flat by comparison. Now, again, I prefer the more contrasted image that just draws you in, looks like you're looking through a picture versus at one, and that's the difference between these two displays more or less in this example. However, again, as we get to this example, LG has made a remarkable recovery from what it did look like, as you can clearly see. Now we have a little bit of the illumination here and the shadow, not as much as we have on the Samsung, where the Samsung is just like plus ultra over here. It looks freaking sick. But at the same time, LG did make an improvement. And this is, again, why I say they look so similar. Because they do look similar with my settings. Again, I am making that distinction because literally no other YouTuber is doing this. However, even amongst my settings, you're still going to have certain details you're not going to have. Again, the drop shadow is strong on the lawn, where it's more faded over here. This is the proof and indication that contrast is weaker. The black levels are weaker on the LG than on the Samsung S95D. The same about the sidewalk and everything like that. So again, you're just going to get more depth out of what we have on the Samsung. That's the reality here. Now, I'm going to go to something that's going to show a little bit more of landscapes. I haven't pre-done this recording as far as like seeing what it's going to look like. So everything I'm about to say is going to be like pretty much a live reaction to it and what it actually looks like. So we're both going to discover that together. We're all going to discover it together, however you want to say that. And here we go. We're in chapter 31 for anybody that wants to replicate this in the Wonderful World of Wonder calibration disc. I'm going to pause right here and we're going to look at the LG. The LG is dominating the Samsung S95D in the color blue. Now we see more of those rich green gradients that I was talking about, and we can see how vast and how wide and how beautiful that looks. Gorgeous, absolutely wonderful. Samsung just fallen behind, can't quite keep up in the way that it's rendered. It is, in a way, more vibrant, okay, more saturated, but it doesn't have that natural nuance to it that the LG does with blue. A WOLED's biggest strength is the color blue. That's just how it is. And anyone trying to pretend like that's not the case is doing you a disservice, because that's just not true. Now, I also want to point out the fact that when I did the comparison against the Samsung S95D, and the S95D had better gradations and more color in the water, I started hearing things like more color doesn't mean the better picture, and a lot of cop-outs were happening. So are we still ready to make that same argument against the LG G4 now, right? Because the LG G4 is clearly better in this example, and it has more color, at least in that example. So again, don't know what to tell you guys. Now, as far as this part, this is a really important thing, the uncompressed part here where they're showing the cube. The clouds back here, you can't see it, but it's flickering with noise on the Samsung S95D. It is so smooth on the LG G4. There is no noise whatsoever in this particular scene. And again, to timestamp it, let's try to timestamp and see where we are. We are at 38:39. So at 38:39, if you want to replicate this, you can, and you can see there's going to be noise on the Samsung that the LG is going to clean up perfectly, and that helps us to understand how the upscaling capabilities work. But also, in that, when you have more pixels or a higher resolution, that's when you start seeing a lot more noise. So that's how you know Samsung's claim of upscaling everything to 4K is true, because they have more noise and artifacts in the clouds. Again, looking at the flowers now, we're going to go ahead and pause here. Samsung has the brighter, more realistic scene. I gravitate towards this more. I feel this is more realistic. LG goes for more of that cinematic color where things are a little bit more flat, kind of brought down a little bit. So again, and they do have the better representation of blue up here versus over here. It's just a tad too dark. So there are things that the LG does do better. And again, a lot of people were kind of on the fence. Which one do I get, S95D, LG G4? I'll just kind of, again, say the S95D is where you go. It has more contrast, more depth. The color is better overall in most of these examples. Again, not saying that there aren't examples like now, the ground, hello, that look better on the LG C4. But again, it trades back and forth depending on what you're looking at if you have the right setup. And again, I love this landscape. I personally gravitate towards the G4 for this. This is gorgeous. Just look at that. Way better than how all the so-called professionals tell you to watch it like. And again, Samsung just can't keep up. Their green is just falling short of realism when you look at the difference comparatively to the LG G4. LG is rocking it with those greens, those blues, and those like browns. Those are just so good on the LG G4. Again, not that the Samsung is bad. You've clearly seen examples where it could wipe the floor with LG without my settings, but an LG G4 rocking my settings is truly doing justice. Now, here's where things are going to get a little preferential, okay? Everybody is going to choose what works best for them. I personally like the look of the image to the left now. While LG usually does a better job with the greens because, again, you have the color management system that allows you to change things around in a way that's realistic, it does fall apart sometimes. And again, highlights. This is where the brightness is coming into effect heavily for Samsung. It's realistic when you're outside to have the sun beaming down on grass and see the highlight of the sun on the grass versus looking like you're just in a rainy day scene all the time on the LG by comparison. And that's where, yes, MLA is in this TV and it's great and everything, but there are some massive like detractors with having MLA2, again, on a WOLED. Now, this scene is a total slaughter on the LG G4 in my personal opinion. The amount of vibrancy coming off of this scene, the depth of every piece of foliage is just looking better. And this is where upscaling comes into play. You are going to see it when you look at the contrast in the leaves. You're going to see it when you look at the flowers versus this, where everything, virtually everything, including now that shade of blue on the LG is just too flat. Everything is flat about the LG right now. Again, we boosted our color significantly, but it's just not enough to get the job done. And ultimately, when that's the case, you kind of know what you're dealing with. I mean, Samsung is like a whole nother world of color, and it's like, why wouldn't you want that? And that's, I mean, again, something that a lot of people are going to wrestle with when they're trying to pick sides. But if you're just shopping around as a normal person, you will have no problem just picking up the Samsung S95D. Now, in this example, one of the things to pay attention to is the Samsung S95D has, again, the better highlights in the middle here on the flowers. The flowers themselves also have more vibrancy. So Samsung is way better at producing purples. LG, not really up to the task. Again, it's not that what they're doing is bad. It's just in this example, not so much. But they do look close. Similar is what I'll say for this. But again, it's that extra brightness, that extra depth because of the brightness and the colors and the contrast all working together on the Samsung that gives it the edge in this particular example as well. And again, this isn't me being biased towards any one or the other. This is just saying it how it is. Like if we look at this example now, you'll kind of see the difference in the color, right? So as I pause, you'll clearly see like Samsung is so bright. It just does a great job of illuminating this forest scene and it looks great. The LG is a little bit on the dimmer side, as you can clearly see by comparison. But again, the LG is only 100 nits brighter than the G3, okay? It is not getting up to 2,100 plus nits like the Samsung S95D. So if you're wondering why are they so vastly different in brightness, this thing is over 2,100 nits of peak brightness. Again, I've measured it, I've seen it. And it's one of those things that people can wrestle with all they want, but it is what it is. Now, when we get to things like this, waterfall type scenarios and things like that, I'm going to gravitate towards Samsung pretty much every day of the week because LG tends to look really blue. Even as I look at it with my naked eye, it just looks really cool in this example, like it's a rainy day. And that, in a lot of examples, is going to be what LG kind of defaults to. Water's not going to be as pure like on the Samsung, that's like a pure white versus, you know, blue now, a bluish white on the LG. It is something that you are going to see from time to time. Again, nothing will ever look quite as blue as we have on the camera and like the tinting of things, but when you see the hues and tonalities of the colors themselves, that's where you're going to notice the biggest difference between colors and so on and so forth. I mean, really, it gets to a point where, again, the LG G4 is not a bad TV. I'm not going to sit here and say it's the worst TV. Not at all. I mean, look at this example. It slaughters the Samsung S95D now. Now we're starting to see, again, remember what I told you, browns, greens, and blues. LG's got that on lock. And we're seeing that here. The browns are to fucking die for. Just look at that. Very gorgeous. Where Samsung just not getting the job done right there. So again, if you're looking at a lot of landscape content, then maybe LG might be the one for you. If you're like a documentary watcher, then LG probably would be the better one because there's a lot of green, there's a lot of brown, especially in those, you know, Africa documentaries and stuff like that. So like you can see a lot more. Now here they look virtually identical. Samsung pulls ahead, and the highlight detail and the TV that draws you immediately is the Samsung. I immediately go, bam, wow, Samsung. Amazing freaking color, amazing depth. But LG does tend to give me that more cinematic look that's easier on the eyes, that's not always highlight rich. But Samsung is capturing all of the ambient light where LG is not. So that's also something to think about as TVs start getting brighter. We're all going to have different opinions on what we like and what we don't like. Again, looking at this scene, that's just too blue, too cold. I don't like that. That you're supposed to have the warmth coming from the sun there, and you do on the Samsung, you don't on the LG. Again, indicative of both TVs doing their thing. And I like that both TVs can do their thing so well. It is impressive. But at the end of the day, it really isn't that hard of a choice if I'm being totally transparent and totally honest. I do feel like there are moments where LG pulls ahead, moments where Samsung pulls ahead. But when we talk about our overall feeling of, you know, just being a consumer and watching the TV, the Samsung S95D does give way more of that cutting edge feel, where when I look at the G4, I do feel like I'm watching a bit of a dated TV, something like my LG C1 would be able to produce more or less. Where when I look at the Samsung S95D, I feel like, wow, like now we're in the future. We have truly arrived. Now, in this example, again, when you start getting to those dark oranges, orange is a close color to brown. So you're going to have better oranges, as you see on Eva here, and that candlelight's going to look better. However, if you look at the highlight, that looks like a true flame. Again, LG with it. It's just not getting it done on the LG G4. Again, it's going to depend on your preference a lot for this stuff too. I mean, after calibration, proper calibration, both do look great, but it's the QD OLED that ultimately does give a little bit extra sauce. It just does. As I look at this scene, I'm looking at Eva stare at this TV. The highlight that just came off, that blue highlight, was incredible on the Samsung S95D. And I think the only thing that I could say to describe the S95D is like it's crystal-like. So like the quality really does feel like I'm looking at a crystal. But I do see wonderful details of ambient light on Eva that I don't have on the S95D. So you're kind of in this weird spot where people are going to ask, okay, so if that's the case, what do I choose? And honestly speaking, again, overall, the winner is the Samsung S95D for the impact, for the contrast, for the depth, for a lot of the stuff that we like. However, I mean, looking at the LG, it's not a slouch either, right? And it, again, in the ways that it's not a slouch. If we were to look at a field of red flowers, for example, like the LG would fall apart very quickly, would not look good at all. That would be the TV I'd say steer clear from. But again, to each their own, I guess. I truly want to put this on record for anybody wondering too. I really believe if LG makes a quantum dot OLED, it really is game over for pretty much everybody, because I believe that much in their ability to render a good image. It's just they're not able to render an image that's quite as nice as this as we're seeing in this example here. And that's ultimately where the win does go to the Samsung S95D. If you have questions, comments, or concerns about this comparison, let me know in the comments down below. But honestly speaking, I love the S95D. I'm not really a big lover of the LG G4 just because I've seen a picture that looks like this before last year on the G3, and I can't really say like if you were between the G3 or the G4 buy the LG G4. No, I would still buy the G3. I still personally would buy the G3. If it was the A95L, or the LG G4, I would run to the A95L. Are you even joking? It's not a comparison at that point, in my opinion. Much like, in my personal opinion, it's really not a comparison for the Samsung S95D. I love the contrast of the S95D, the color, the separation, the isolation. It just draws you in way more. I want to feel like I'm looking through my TV and not at it, and that's why I made the determination that I did after all the various factors that we talked about in this video. Again, very long video at 25 minutes, but you have to see what I'm talking about. Again, this will be the final example, color red. You're seeing a good example of this here. I paused the screen. You can see the vibrancy of those red flowers just overtake the blood orange red that LG has. This has been LG's bane. If they can fix this, they have a fighting chance, but this is LG's problem and has been for years, and nobody is listening, nobody is talking about it, and nobody is trying to fix it, and that is ultimately why LG keeps failing. Year after year after year, these comparisons, again, looking at the depth and the isolation around this flower that is more flat on the LG. These things matter. And red is one of the most primary colors of which a lot of other colors are born. And that ultimately, for me, makes the determination, especially because to me, I cannot stand sour reds. Sour reds are such a no-no for me, and LG has sour reds. So, of course, for me, I'm going to gravitate towards the Samsung S95D, and, of course, contrast, highlight, detail, having motion processing in game mode that smooths it out, right? It's going to be a win, again, for the S95D in all those areas where, again, LG is just not quite as strong. But if you disagree, let me know in the comments down below. If you agree, let me know. Either way, I'm good. If you dislike this video, make sure you hit that dislike button twice. Either way, thanks again for watching the #1 brand in honesty. And until the next video, I'll see you guys later.